Great, thank you very much. Welcome to everyone. And could I ask everybody in the room, first of all, to introduce themselves, because we have found is when you're online, you can't see the people in the room, believe it or not. So I'll kick off. I'm Lyndon. I'm chair of the Scrutiny Performance Panel. And James.
Hello, I'm Councillor James McGettrick from Sketty.
I'm Sandra Joy from Uplands.
Angela O'Connor from the Mumbles Ward.
And Councillor Francesca O'Brien from Mumbles Ward.
Councillor Adam Davis from Llwchor Ward.
Councillor Robert Smith, also Llwchor Ward and Cabinet Member for Education and Learning.
David Thomas, Principal School Improvement Advisor, Swansea Council.
Michelle Roberts, Scrutiny Officer.
Great, thanks. But say thank you all very much indeed. As there any disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests with anyone? No, taking that as a
Oh.
We do.
Just as a new member to Scrutiny, obviously, I wasn't sure whether it's appropriate to raise that. Obviously, me and Robert share a ward, but as far as I can see on the agenda, there's no specific ward information, so I wasn't sure about whether I need to raise that or is it okay to just let that slide? Not let it slide, but is it worth remarking? Just to check. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And if it is, Michelle will send you the necessary form, okay? Obviously, prohibition of whip votes, and the minutes of the previous meeting have been sent out to everybody. Shall I go through them? We think it's page 1 for you to see if you think it's a correct record. Page 1, 2, 3. Yes, if I could have a proposer, there's Francesca, seconder, and James then. Yeah, we are. Great, thank you very much. We're racing through this, but the rest of it will take a bit longer. There are no public. Sorry, there are the minutes letters. I'd sent and you've got a copy of it, a letter off to Councillor Robert Smith, who we welcome, Cabinet Member. Didn't ask him to reply on this occasion, but we do that at the end of each meeting because it's a good record of what we've discussed. And if Robert needs to reply, then you do, and it's a good two-way exchange. Okay, so I don't know if anybody's got any comments on the letter. No, I think you've all seen it in any case, because we do send it round to you all to have an input into that letter. So thank you. Right, public questions, there aren't any. So that's and then we've got the first major item on the agenda is additional learning needs reform. This is something that we're really keen on, and we've got a watching brief on it. So it'll come up during the course of the year because it is a really important issue. So this is the first of 2 updates. And I know we've got, as I said, Councillor Robert Smith, the Cabinet Member, Helen Morgan-Rees, our Director of Education, and welcome Helen online, and Kate Phillips, Head of Vulnerable Learners, and Alison Lane, Head of Additional Learning Needs Team. I don't know who wants to go first.
If I can just introduce it, Chair, because I think this is an impressive story that we've got to say as a council in Swansea. When I first became aware of what Welsh Government were planning, and it was around about 2014, and the scope of what their intentions were then, I had my doubts because of the scale of the change, the number of different agencies that would have to be involved, and the level of cooperation between local authorities, between families, between the health authorities and so on, and it could make the list is endless. As Cabinet Member, I sat in on the working group that was taking forward the various work streams for this in Swansea, and I can honestly say that the work that our office has put into this has been absolutely superb, and I commend the work, the level of detail and the effort that has gone on. Kate will take you through. I think it is Kate that's going to take you through the report, or is it Alison?
Alison.
Alison, sorry, Alison will take you through the report, but I want to put that on record now. The thanks to all the members of staff that have been involved with this. Are we there yet? Are we implementing it perfectly as intended? Well, no, we're not. There are challenges. Some of them are within our control. Others are set externally. But I think what Alison will give you is a true picture of where we're at. But again, I'd emphasize the work that has gone in by our own officers to take us to where we are now. So sorry, Alison, it's over to you to take us through the report.
Many thanks.
Thank you, Alison.
Councillor. So if I would like to reaffirm the amount of work that has, there was significant challenges with introducing and implementing this new legislation. The Additional Learning Needs and Education Tribunal Act was passed in 2018, and it began implementation in September 2021. But there was a huge amount of work that went on prior to this implementation date to ensure readiness for the reform and ensuring our stakeholders, schools, early years settings, and FE partners were already informed and had the skills and knowledge that they needed to implement the Act successfully. And in order to achieve that, we have undertaken an extensive transformational programme to achieve its aims. During the implementation phase, of which we're still in the middle of, we are running a dual legislative system. So we are running the old SEN system as well as the new ALN system. And we've got a clear timeline which is issued from Welsh Government outlining the year groups that will transition and when they will transition into the new ALN system. So whilst initially the reform was packaged as cost neutral by Welsh Government, they have since recognised that this isn't necessarily the case, and they have committed to provide funding over the next 3 years, although we're yet to have the firm details on that yet. However, there are no clear plans from Welsh Government at present on how those additional costs of the reform will be funded long term, so we're still waiting for some clarification on that. The collaboration between stakeholders has been really quite exceptional in delivering this transformation. However, I would say that the local health board have been less prepared in relation to the implementation of the reform. However, they are now fully engaged with the transformational programme and have provided some clarity on their position on what would constitute health ALP that they would be responsible for delivering for children and young people with additional learning needs. They have confirmed that they will not be providing additional funding to implement the reform unless this is provided by Welsh Government. So we've got some clarity in relation to their position going forward. The ALN strategy that outlines our transformational programme was for between 2019 and 2022. And this was overseen, as you mentioned, Councillor Roberts, on the ALN Strategic Board. And this outlined the transformational programme required to implement the Act in Swansea. That programme has been successfully delivered by the managed by ALNET managers and Elenco cluster leads, and this was overseen by a transformational programme manager. And there has been significant investment from the council to deliver this programme, and that's enabled us to be successful in its delivery. So we have met with some successes and challenges, along the way, and there continues to be ongoing significant challenges that we have to overcome. But the overriding message is that the implementation of the Act has remained on task, regardless of the challenges that we've faced. We've continued to deliver. Examples of the current and future challenges that we are facing is the Welsh Government conversion timeline for the year 23-24 has considerable workload concerns, both from a local authority and a school perspective, and that has been shared with Welsh Government, and they are considering those views on and whether to issue additional guidance on the conversion from the SEN system to the ALN system. The additional challenge is the ongoing impact of COVID. This has meant that children are starting or returning to school with additional support needs, notably speech and language difficulties and behavioural challenges, which again are additional requirements of support than perhaps we would have faced prior to COVID. There are also challenges in appointing to teaching assistant roles due to the cost of living crisis, with TAs telling us that they can no longer afford to be TAs, for instance, and so that is significant challenges. And these play a key role for supporting learners. And without them, it could lead to more costly provision. There's also some lack of clarity on how the funding for post-16 provision will be delegated to local authorities by Welsh Government. And so, you know, we're still awaiting clarity on that to ensure that we will receive the funding that we require in order to meet the additional responsibility for this cohort of learners. We have planned for known staffing requirements, etc., of the implementation of the Act. However, because it's such a transformational change and it does introduce the 0 to 25 age range, it is very difficult to predict the actual figures and the demand on the service as we implement the legislation. And as we proceed, that will become clearer as we move forward with that implementation. And there's also a likelihood that it's expected that there will be an increase in tribunal appeals, and this is due to the need to create new case law for this new legislation, and inevitably tribunals will be costly and difficult to predict the level of increase at this point. However, it has to be said that the person-centred approach that is being used in Swansea has had significant impact on improving planning for the children and young people that we serve, and so that we can come to a co-produced agreement in relation to provision for learners going forward. Regardless of the challenges, there is a true commitment to the delivery of the new legislation and the culture change that it aims to achieve. And that's really important to us. That it's a culture change at all levels, from professionals to parents to carers, and we're working really hard to promote that culture change. The ALNET strategy from 2019 to 22 has been reviewed and finalised, with a new strategy drafted that aligns to the regional strategy. And this new strategy is the following priority areas. So we're looking at schools, post-16, collaboration and early years. And whilst we continue to support the development of skills and processes, that's going to keep on going. We've done a huge amount of work in upskilling our staff in schools with accredited programmes, for instance, and robust training package. Our next steps are on the quality assurance, so we can ensure that our ALM provision is consistent across Swansea, that we've got a consistent offer, and that it is of the desired quality. We're also a key focus for us is post-16 provision, because this goes live in September, and to continue with that collaborative approach with all our key stakeholders. So yeah, it's been a great piece of work. I think that, you know, as you say, I really want to commend all officers that have been involved in it, because it's been a huge piece of work, and the commitment of the team has been exceptional. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Alison, for that detailed report. It's been, by the look of it, quite a journey, actually. Before I open it up to questions, Kate, do you want to say something, or Helen?
Can I come in quick? Is that okay? Yeah, just to kind of, strengthen what Alison has said as well. There's a lot of work has taken place, and we've successfully kind of concluded one area of development around the transformation programme, but that's very much part of the journey. And the next stage will be, I think equally as challenging, but also we've got the same level of commitment to that, and some of the real positives coming out of the co-production and the work with our partners and Health Board feel quite positive for the future. And I think we've learned from some of the challenges of the transformation programme, and that will help us with the next stage of the strategy. And we'll be keen to share that with you as well as it develops. So yeah, lots has been done and lots still to do, really.
Great, thank you. And Helen's got her hand up. Helen.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add really to what colleagues have already said, I mean, these changes to provision across the City and County of Swansea count for nothing if it doesn't make a change to a learner and the families who care for learners with additional learning needs. So the engagement with our parent carer forum here in Swansea has been significant, and that's to be applauded and to continue. But essentially, our aims really is that this system now in Swansea is far more child-centred, less about paperwork and more about people. And I leave it at that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Helen. Right, questions? Any questions at all? Oh, James.
Hi, yeah, thank you for the report. It's very comprehensive, and I can see a huge amount of work's gone in. So just to echo everyone else's thanks, I only had 2 questions, and these might just be naive because I'm new at being a councillor. But thank you for one thing that popped out from the report was the cost neutral comment from Welsh Government. That does seem very optimistic, even just looking at the scope of things. Just to bring that sort of towards the later sections 11, where you were talking about sort of difficulties in prediction, is that uncertainty about what's happening with Welsh Government actually affecting the implementation? I can see you're clearly managing it, but just to know. And then the second one's really just for information, where you're talking about post 16, you say the college, that's Gower College, is it? And is that because it's multiple sites, so it covers a nice geographic spread? It may be obvious, but just to clarify, thank you.
Great, thanks. Alison, is it?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Pick up on the first point. We are managing the complexities really as they come through at this point. It is very difficult because we're a completely new cohort and age range, so it is very difficult to anticipate and to plan for. However, close working relationships with our colleagues in social services in terms of the early years have enabled creative ways of working and joint working to better support those learners in that early years sector, which has been hugely beneficial in the implementation. The joint working and the relationships between social services and education has really been strengthened during this transformation, and how we support this early years sector in particular collectively has really been enhanced. Work very, very closely together. In terms of the post 16, FEI covers colleges, so it would cover Gower College. Those are our direct partners, if you like, from a college perspective. But we also link with Newport Talbot College, Powys, and and also it captures the sixth form as well. So it covers that range of people.
Great, thanks, Alison. Any follow-up, James, or?
No, thank you very much.
Great. Sandra.
First of all, thank you, because I think what you're doing is absolutely phenomenal. And I have to say, I'd be as strong as you, James, as I'm jaw-dropping that Welsh Assembly government think this is cost neutral. Even to consider the transitional arrangements and the training implications and so on of something like this. And my question is about that level of training. With the elencos as they were in schools being changed into the new structure, what sort of training implications are there and how are you able to manage that, and what support you're giving them in order to ensure that at the end of the day, every IDP across Swansea is consistent?
Thank you. Yeah, there's been over the last over the period of the transformation, there's been significant. We develop an ALN training menu that is shared with all of our stakeholders. So it's shared with school, early years colleagues, and FEI colleagues as well. We also have we enable access to the independent schools around Swansea, as well as local health board partners as well. So the training menu is open to all key stakeholders. Parents have accessed that training as well in some cases, and so that training offer is available and it's robust. We've managed to deliver on that through grant funding in the main. We've utilised grant funding from Welsh Government to enable the training to be delivered to schools, and we've ensured we've trained a number of elencos be accredited to level 7 to be able to undertake assessments and planning interventions for learners with ALN, so that they are better able within the school setting to identify and plan for needs. So that there's that element. Sorry, was there a second part to your question?
Sorry, my question was simply to ensure that every IDP across Swansea is consistent.
Sorry. And the other point that I was going to raise is that we've had a period of implementation of training which continues, but at this point, so this year, there is much more focus on that quality assurance to ensure that there's a consistency of provision and IDP development. So we are holding moderation events. So all of our schools bring IDP for discussion and agreement in terms of making sure that there is a consistency of approach across the board. The first event for that moderation has already happened, and some key themes have been identified from that moderation, and as a result, training is already has already been developed and is about to be delivered to elencos in response to the findings of that first moderation event. So, and then we will have a rolling programme of the moderation so that we can ensure that we keep on top of that.
Great, thank you, Alison. Thanks. Any other questions? Francesca.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the team. I think I just want to echo my thanks and what my colleagues have said, that obviously it was evident reading that report, a huge amount of work has gone into that. So fantastic. And I'm sure that you've got more than enough to do with this as included, but maybe not, I don't know if this is the right question, but how do we differentiate between those that need ALN or those who are simply perhaps behind because of COVID? I just wondered, I know sort of my own experience, if I may, that going from one primary school to another, some teachers do seem to be very much on the ball of identifying perhaps those who are perhaps maybe needing that extra support, and that they're not sure whether that's simply because many children missed out on almost 2 years of education. How are we going to identify those between that actually may have ALN support and those that just simply need a bit of extra time in catching up from COVID? Thank you.
That's a great question. Thank you. In terms of identifying ALN, there's a staged process in that a child can have identified learning difficulties. that require short intervention that will result in the progress that we would be hoping for. And that isn't considered an ALN, but that is available to all learners. And it's only when that intervention needs to happen for a prolonged period and there isn't significant progress that it then tips into an ALN and is covered by the legislation. So effectively, you could be delivering the same intervention and it be considered ALN for one learner because they need it long term, or it could be considered a catch-up program because it's for other learners for a shorter period of time. And so that's kind of the process in determining the ALN or not. In terms of consistency across all schools, we are really keen to share good practice, and we're identifying the great practice that's happening in schools. And we've got a mechanism to be able to share that with other schools so that we can share that learning and expertise, so that we can develop that consistency, hopefully across all of the schools. That's the aim.
Great, thank you. Have you got a follow-up?
I think there's some, I can't read the name. My eyesight's not loud. I can't read.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of build on that point that Alison made just now in relation to the previous question around the work that's happening on quality assurance, because that's something that we're really developing going forward, and it's about ensuring that consistency of offer for all children wherever they may go to school, that kind of baseline offer, if you like, it is consistent, quality assured, and there's an equity for all children, whichever school that they're in. It's a really important element that we're developing going forward. And I think, the training's been really, really important and really comprehensive. The next step on from that is making sure that, we can be absolutely confident that that's being embedded and implemented across all our schools. And where it's not, we put support in place to help practitioners, to be able to deliver what the expectations would be in a supportive way.
Thank you. Could I next call Robert Smith, Cabinet Member, and then Hazel.
Thanks. And I go back to Francesca's question. I mean, that borderline between what was an additional learning need or special education need as it was, and what was more of a catch-up approach, that was always an issue. I remember the Basic Skills Agency, for instance, came out addressing that very issue, with a strategy addressing that very issue. One of the benefits, I think, of this system, as opposed to the previous one, is that this does allow that flexibility. If the ALN system that we've got in Wales, implemented properly and at its best, will address those very issues and give schools the flexibility to do that. But I emphasise implemented properly and at its very best.
Great, thank you. Hazel.
I'm sorry, I haven't put my mic on. I listened to you very carefully, and what comes out to me is how well we've done in Wales as far as education is concerned. I feel quite proud of it, as a matter of fact. And I'd like to check with how you feel, the experts. It's years since I was in the classroom. I no longer can even pretend to be an expert. It's that long ago. And I'm just wondering how we fared with the early years in preschool education. As a result of COVID, the children were not at school, so were not affected by the classroom. But how did their development survive through COVID? And that sort of education, did it go ahead with research into it, or did it, just get lost along the way? How have we come out in that? I just wonder.
Great, thank you. I can see Helen's got her hand up and eager to answer.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Yes, we've had a lot of anecdotal evidence from our schools in Swansea that there has been some learning loss as a result of the pandemic, and indeed not just learning loss, but the missed opportunities to see health professionals during lockdown periods and beyond. So we are detecting from an early years perspective, specifically in relation to ALN, that there are some deficits that we need to attend to. So there is a lot of catch-up to be considered in the system. And as Alison described, the difference between long-term and short-term interventions, We really need to ensure that we are capturing the baseline and assessing very carefully the expected levels of progress as well. So that is something that we would wish to assess at a baseline level when children arrive in our schools. And indeed in Swansea, that happens at a nursery age. So at least we've got a good handle because we don't have a non-maintained education system in Swansea. Other local authorities do. So nursery education isn't always on a school site. So we're lucky in Swansea because we can catch them early to ensure that they're reaching their educational milestones as well as other milestones as well. So I think it is something that we are grappling with and continue to consider really, because undoubtedly there has been a detrimental effect to a lot of learners as a result of the pandemic.
Great, thank you, Helen. Hazel, do you want to come back, or are you okay with
No,
that?
I'm quite happy with that. I mean, as I pointed out, I've always been proud of Swansea's results in education. We had nurseries in Swansea before other towns had it, and it's never gone backwards. It's always moved forwards. Frankly, it's I shouldn't say, but I'm going to say it. In every Labour Health seat, there's always been very good results in education, because education is one of Labour's first aims. And Swansea has not gone backwards. It continues to go forward, and I'm proud of that. And I'd like to thank all of you who were involved in education, how hard you're actually working for us.
Great, thanks. The next, could I call David Thomas next, and then Alison?
Yeah, thanks. Councillor Morris, I'm not sure if you mentioned preschool, but there's a fair bit of work that's undertaken in Swansea in particular with regards to our preschoolers. Whilst it's non-statutory and falls outside of the scope of ALNET, in some ways, perhaps the work that Alison's described, but I can tell you firsthand of the hard work that goes on with Flying Start being a conduit to that, with 18 settings in Swansea, which is nearly a third of our primary settings. Welsh Government's release of the funded, non-maintained draft assessment guidance, work with colleagues in ALN, the early years practitioners that Alison can make further reference to, is helping to shape not only those settings that are not maintained by education, but maintained by Child Family Services in the Flying Start settings, but it's helping to influence at an early stage the childcare settings that exist within Swansea. So schools, local authority officers are making those links with children from zero right now. I can't tell you the impact of that currently, but what I can tell you is that school leaders, head teachers are really interested in the work that goes on before children get to school. And I think that's important. Helen mentions baseline. We have a really early baseline in Swansea, and we are able to build upon that. Curriculum for Wales provides us with a conduit to assist in that too. So in answer to your question, if it related in some way to preschool, we're in a really strong position in Swansea, given the fact that we hold a number of settings with 2 to 3 year olds, and also the strong links provided by early years practitioners, some of which sit within Alison's team.
Great, thank you. And Alison.
Yeah, just to reaffirm what's been said in relation to the baseline information, or we work really closely with our Flying Start settings and early years providers, and we undertake speech and language screening for all pupils or children who come into the Flying Start setting, so we can screen for any speech and language difficulties at that very, very early stage. And put in that really, really early intervention to avoid any escalation of need. And then there's a continuum that follows the child in terms of that welcome, support and assessment and intervention that follows them into school. So we've got that really tied up in relation to identifying those needs really, really, providing the support where it's needed. And we have found, that we've identified lots of learners who need that additional intervention following the screening, that after a period of intervention, they don't need that ongoing support. So it's been really, really successful. And that was introduced, that we've been doing that for a number of years, for a significant number of years before COVID. And so we're just building on the good provision that we've and the good practice that we've done before has really helped us through this time.
Right, thank you very much, Alison. Are there any further questions? Then oh, go on.
I promise this is the last question, but I also reading the report, I think it was really good to hear that, you know, you're very keen on catching it early, you know, identifying those issues. As somebody who is dyslexic themselves, and for many years they didn't quite know what to sort of do with me, how to sort of address it. But it's so good to see that those issues are being picked up and that the support is there. But my question was, if a child, whether it's a TA or a school teacher identifies that maybe a child needs that extra learning support, how is there sort of a test now? I don't know what, you know, it's been quite some years since I've been in school. Is there a test that you do? And since identifying that and sort of confirmed, how long is it until perhaps that additional help is in place? Thank you.
At the very earliest stages, there's a number where there's a significant number of screening tests and assessments that are undertaken by the Elenco, and that formed part of our training package to Elencos to enable them to upskill them with the skills and the knowledge that they needed to identify at the earliest opportunity. So we've got a number of Elencos who are able to screen at the very earliest opportunity and develop that intervention. So in effect, it should happen as soon as the screen is done in the school. You could have that support almost immediately for that. So that's the benefit really of this new way of working, to try and get in as early as possible so that can happen as early as possible. In terms of more formal assessments, there are waiting lists for some diagnoses, for instance, and things like that. But you know, we work really closely with the health board to try and manage that. And I think that the really important thing for us is that our provision isn't diagnosis led, and that we put the support in to meet the need and don't wait for the diagnosis.
Great, thank you, Alison. Do you need to come back?
No, I was just going to say, I think that's really reassuring that you're not sort of waiting, because you know what that is. You know, is it like an NHS waiting list where you're waiting for that? You know, so that's really good that action is being taken. And if that's sort of one of the best things that come out of this new change, then I think it's fantastic. So no, thank you.
Great, thank you. And Kate had her hand up.
I did, but Alison really covered it. It was just to emphasise that need-led service. Really, that's really important to us, that we don't wait for a diagnosis, but that we support all our schools, and our schools are really bought into that concept as well around meeting need. And diagnoses are helpful, of course they are, but we know sometimes there's a delay and a wait, and it's really critical that the support is in place based on the presenting need at the time. So.
Great, thank you very much. And if there aren't any other questions, thank you all very much for your contributions. And as I said at the start, we've come on quite a journey and done an awful lot of work, hard work. So thank you all. The next item on the agenda is the pupil development grant spend on vulnerable pupils. And again, this is an animal item, and I know we've got Robert here, Helen and Kelly Small, so I don't know who's going to lead on that.
I'll introduce it again then, Chair. You'll recall from the Education and Skills PDC discussion, and it says there May 2019, and this was something that we looked at as a committee with a view to getting a consistent approach across the whole of Swansea in the way schools were using the opportunities of the PDG. Not only consistency, but ensuring that all schools were aware of good practice, and that that good practice that we knew existed within individual schools was disseminated across the whole system. Obviously, May 2019 was turned out to be an odd place to start, because within 7 or 8 months we were into the pandemic. Now, my concern has always been that the gains that we were beginning to see through the use of the PDG were eroded by COVID, by the fact that children weren't in school, they weren't accessing the extra support which that grant was designed to provide them with. And that's not just an issue in Swansea, it's an issue across the whole of Wales, and it is an issue across the whole of the UK. And we are yet to be able to decide to determine what impact the lockdown and COVID has had on learners in general, but the most vulnerable learners in particular. And I think that remains a concern. Well, it's heightened concern, certainly for us as a council. So what the report does is to present the picture of what is happening on the ground. But I think, again, we've got to recognise that this is work in progress, and there are many, many challenges that perhaps we didn't anticipate when at the time when this strategy was developed. But let's look at the evidence. And I think, is it Helen or Kelly that's going to lead on this?
I'll just say a few words of introduction, Councillor Smith, but largely Kelly will just take you through the importance of ensuring efficiency and effectiveness of the use of spend, really, in relation to the Pupil Development Grant, because any money at this moment in time is important, isn't it? And our role as a local authority is to ensure that the appropriate spending plans are in place so that any devolved monies is in abeyance with grant terms and conditions. I won't steal Kelly's thunder, but certainly our role really is to ensure that if there is good practice, we pick it up from a school improvement perspective, but also we are compliant really with the expectations of this grant. So I'll hand over to Kelly at that point.
Kelly.
Thanks, Ellen. Thanks. If you don't mind, I'll try and share my screen so the presentation's there for us to through. Can you see that? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So as was mentioned, it was the May 2019 PDC that supported the recommendations regarding how we use our PDG in Swansea. So Di Thomas is here with us, so hopefully Di can jump in with anything on here, because during the autumn term visits of the school improvement team, they will consider the school's PDG plans as part of that process. So what they'll look at is sort of like a high level challenge really on where the money is being spent, just to make sure it's complying as best as we can with the terms and conditions of that grant. So senior staff in the school are responsible for implementing those plans. It's worth noting, obviously, that the plans are there not just to look at the children with free school meals, but it's the vulnerable learners in the school. So it can be used a lot more widely than just pupils on free school meals. So plans that are there will outline the actions that schools have, and they should also link with the school's strategic plans that every school should have as well. So pupil progress is tracked to make sure that there is effectiveness of those plans. So just to give you a summary there of how much money has gone out in the last financial year on the grant that's been used, it equates to £1,150 a pupil, which is an extra third on top of the age-weighted pupil unit that the schools get. So it is, a substantial additional help going out there to the schools. There is obviously some concern. You'll be aware of the rollout of the universal free school meals to reception year group this year. So we are working with our schools now to make sure that parents who are eligible for free school meals do come forward and do put in the claims for eligibility, because obviously what we want is to make sure that they are in our next count shown as eligible for free school meals, so that we can make sure we get the grant, and obviously that the parents get what they're entitled to from school uniform grant, etc. So here's some other information here on the secondary schools and how much they get as well. So as we said, in some cases, it can be substantial, 367,000 being the largest amount there. Schools do have access to a flow chart that they can use just to make sure the grant is eligible. The plans they've got are eligible for the grant spend. So they can go through this flow chart just to identify that before they actually go forward with the spend. And here are some examples of what schools are spending in Swansea. So a lot of these are catch up. We talked about that earlier as well. So schools can use it on those, supporting mental health, staff training, some well-being. We've talked about trauma-informed schools, etc. Sorry, I'm whizzing through these, but you've probably seen the presentations. Trackings that they've got there, employing staff to support families, implemented speech and language programs, again supporting the previous presentation that we've had, and increasing staffing ratios in the early years. So we've got providing breakfast club for some pupils, homework clubs, computer skills, and also supporting the more able and talented pupils with the free school meals as well in subjects like maths and English. So we also use the grant in our schools to support families. So this can be used to offset things like if the children have a snack in school, paying for some after school clubs and childcare, sort of subsidising or paying for school trips, and also purchasing IT equipment for blended learning or for homework for learners to be able to take devices home with them. So the impact that we've seen is improved engagement from learners, fewer social services referrals, and improved attendance, attainment, teaching. Obviously, with attainment, we're not recording it as we used to throughout our schools, but obviously it's a judgment from our teachers. And there are improved parent skills and relationships with the schools. So the Welsh Government and Estyn have come out with some reports as well. These are available for schools to use, and there have been more recent annual reports as well. These reports have identified what isn't successful, and what they say isn't successful is simply just using the money to employ more teaching assistants, in schools, except for where the teachers and the TAs are working effectively. Ability grouping isn't successful. Reducing the primary class sizes isn't successful, and teacher performance related pay. So it's more about the sort of, looking at the individual support for learners rather than general sort of approaches like this. So these are the Welsh Government from their reports, top 4 good practice. So, effective feedback on learning, looking at self-regulation, peer tutoring, and early intervention. And then Estyn had their top 10 from their report as well. So again, looking at sort of data and tracking, in their tailoring the curriculum to the needs of the disadvantaged pupils, etc. So in addition to the main pupil development grant, we get funding for looked after children as well. So this is distributed to clusters in Swansea. It is spent on similar areas, but it is additional funding then just to recognise those children who are looked after in our schools. Partner areas have a big role in this. We have a regional officer that works with our LAC coordinators in allocating the funding and working on the allocations of grant. And then finally, really, we have got innovative and effective use of grant in Swansea. It does have a positive impact on staff development, wellbeing, attendance and attainment. And the recommendations, from these reports have been realised in our Swansea schools. I should add as well, I've mentioned partner areas. We do have a regional officer for PDG as well, Dylan, and we do work together, quite closely to make sure that we do provide the training that's needed in schools, particularly for emotional coaching and trauma-informed schools. That was a quick whiz through the report here. I don't know if anybody wants to ask anything.
Good, thank you, Kelly. It's important to see what goes well and what isn't going so well as well, but I'm pleased to say a lot of it is going well. So are there any questions? No? Oh, yes, Adam.
Thank you for the presentation. Very, very happy with that. It's good to see the results coming through as well. Today, I'm sure you'll have noticed the Office for Budget Responsibility have forecast, I think, is a 4.3% drop in disposable income for families. That represents the largest drop on record since the ONS started recording, I think, in the 50s. So naturally, we're probably going to see an uptick in pupils in Swansea that are going to be relying on the services provided by the grants. How well do we think our schools and these institutions are prepared for a sudden upsurge, and is that what provisions are in place if services start to struggle?
All right, who is David? Sorry, David.
Yeah, do you want me to take this one, Kel?
Yes, please.
Okay, so it's a difficult picture to predict. What we know is that universal free school meals is going to be something that's a challenge for us. But the numbers are the numbers, and the grant is based on actual access to eligibility to free school meals. And we can't predict this because whilst we have an understanding of the democratic position, parents themselves have to sign up to it. Schools work particularly hard to sell the benefits of such, the application to the grant, as Kelly's mentioned, a uniform grant, the access to a free school meal, but universal free school meals tends to, if it's universal, parents think, why do I need to bother? But there's a number of other benefits. In terms of the capacity to deliver, the grant does provide schools with a significant amount of top-up cash, as it seems to, but the reality is that schools are already using this to provide, I don't want to use the word base education, but they use it well to provide a universal provision. So in terms of what that looks like for schools, we're not providing a huge amount of cash to parents directly using the grant. And I hope that sort of answers the question. We like to think that that grant is going to be sustainable. Otherwise, for schools that's going to be a really heavy blow. And we rely on the lobbyists to be able to maintain that through their challenges to Welsh Government, etc. But the work that goes on in schools is, as suggested by Kelly, innovative. It continues to be so, and we continue to work with our regional partners and Dillon Williams to find some really key strategies to work best for those learners. And it does provide a significant amount of support for learners, both those who are eligible for free school meals and for those who class themselves or we see as being vulnerable. So I hope that answers the question. Schools have the capacity to provide, but that grant needs to maintain.
Great. Can I call on Robert and then Helen?
Yeah, and I think you've raised an interesting point there, Adam, in terms of first of all, the use of eligibility for free school meals. Because let's not get hung up about this. That was a proxy for deprivation. Now, it wasn't a very effective proxy for deprivation. The problem was no one could find a better one than the one that was using, and it was less bad than anything else that anyone came up with. And I do think we've got to be open about that. But it wasn't a perfect measure. So, with universal free school meals now in primary schools being rolled out, I think that is going to be an issue, and we are taking steps to try and, as Kelly described, to try and address that. In terms of what schools are doing, and one of the benefits of the way the pupil development grant was implemented in Wales was that the schools had flexibility in how that was being used, and were able to identify and use as many strategies as they chose to do so. Now, if you look at what's happening in Swansea, there's evidence from people like the Education Endowment Foundation and other bodies working across the UK as a whole about what strategies are most effective in addressing the impact of deprivation in education, which is what we're talking about here. So I think there's an evidence base there. What we know is that the need is now a lot deeper. There's a combination of factors. The recession is going to make it worse. COVID has certainly made it worse. But it's getting those strategies in place, and it's about the quality of implementation. And I think looking at the evidence coming back from schools and from our own officers, there is evidence of good practice across the whole of Swansea.
Thank you, Robert. Helen.
Thank you, Chair. In response to Councillor Davis's question, generally speaking, as you said, the disposable income that families have will be very much reduced. And with that in mind, Kelly does represent education on the Council's Poverty Forum, and there is a keen focus there on how we support all families at this time in ensuring that no child is disadvantaged, and we consider all kinds of aspects, for example, the cost of the school day for families, whether they're entitled to free school meals or not. Those costs, if you have multiple siblings in a family, are quite considerable. So we are looking at ways of reducing the costs and indeed engaging with our schools and giving them tips really and ideas really on how they can look at that through a different lens and a very current lens, as you described there, Councillor Davis.
Great, thanks. Sandra.
Thank you. My question is to yourself, David, if that's all right, because you do the autumn visits, so you look at the PDG submissions. The trouble with this grant, sometimes it can be a blanket grant, can't it, that covers both free school meals children and vulnerable learners, for all the right reasons. But there are also a group of children that tend to be, maybe they are, to be anecdotal, they might be working at a C grade level, but had they got the extra support, they might be working at a B or an A grade level in a secondary school. They're doing their homework on their mobile phone instead of doing their homework on a laptop. And the PDG grant might be something where that child could in some way benefit. So my question is when you're looking at these PDG submissions for the year, is there built into the PDG submission within each school the idea that there could also be individual support as well as blanket support?
Good question, thank you. So just going back to the example you gave about providing, for example, a laptop for a learner who isn't eligible for free school meals, we are on a little bit of grey area. So the grant conditions would say that it's absolutely appropriate that a learner in the same room or group or year group as those who were entitled to free school meals, if the grant would provide them with better teaching as well as those who were eligible for free school meals, that's absolutely fine. What we can't do is target those learners who are not eligible specifically with the grant. So can we provide a laptop for a child who's not eligible for free school meal who is vulnerable? The answer is no. However, good teaching is good teaching. So what we tend to find is we prioritise that through the lens of free school meals, and we track those learners who are eligible for free school meals, but also those who aren't. And the reality is when we teach well and they learn well, you know, the tide comes in for everybody, all boats float. In terms of the grant submissions, so schools are required to produce a grant spend plan. Kelly and I have had this conversation recently. It's quite a high level plan that's published on their website. So if they get allocated £100,000, when you look at it in detail for a school, you know, Kelly's mentioned that I think the average was, I can't remember, £7,000 per school, for example. If a school gets £100,000 and they choose to employ a well-being officer for the school, you know, on costs is around £30,000. Already we've spent a significant amount of money. So those grants, those spend plans are not detailed. And actually, it's really difficult for us when we go in through that one visit to unpick the details of the spend, and that needs to be done right at the end of the year. But what I can tell you is that learner progress is clearly the focus for those visits as well. And, you know, I can't give you the answers at the moment because we haven't undertaken all of the visits, and certainly through the work that we'll be doing in the spring term, schools have traditionally tracked the progress of all learners very well in Swansea, and that's still going to be promoted by the team. You know, we're not going to ask them to drop that. Yes, you know, I think I've described to you about we can't give the laptop to the child who's not eligible for free school meals. But there are other things we dovetail. So, for example, in that circumstance, in that example you give, the digital grant, the digital sustainable grant that was available for Swansea, did manage to produce a huge amount of devices which schools could use as they wish. So we can dovetail, and we have got those options. So I hope that provides an answer. If not, happy to take further questions.
Good. Any further questions? What I could say is that I know certainly during COVID, I used some of my community fund to buy, Chromebooks and so on for some pupils, and that did solve a problem. And so we do have that sort of thing that we can do personally as well. Great.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I will hand over to David on this again. It's the report outlines the work of the school improvement team. It's an important part of the council's armoury in terms of the way we work with schools, the way we know our schools and know what's going on in schools, because at the end of the day, that is where the work is done. But it's essential that we know what's going on, not in terms of monitoring, but that we know what the challenges are, we know what the successes are, and that we know what the needs are in schools on the ground, so that we're able to respond to them. So David, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor. Double whammy for me today. I've got two pieces to present on. First being the school improvement team. You'll have seen the papers, and I haven't produced a whizzy PowerPoint presentation like Kelly has, so my apologies. So I'll summarise the report, and happy to take questions, of course. So there's been changes since the last time we presented, namely me, and the way that we operate. So the background to me is I'm the head teacher of Portmead Primary School. I'm on secondment for 2 years as a school improvement advisor. My predecessor, Damien Beach, secured a headship, and therefore there was a vacancy, and my hand was extended. So here I find myself in the principal school improvement role. We consumed the primary and secondary teams together, so we don't view those in isolation now, and I think that's a good thing. And you'll learn a little bit more about that perhaps in the next presentation with Curriculum for Wales and its view that it should be 3 to 16. We've got a group of head teachers who are either are commissioned out of their role as a head teacher. So I would buy their time to undertake visits. Not forgetting there's 95 settings in Swansea, so it's a significant task to undertake at least one visit per term per school or setting. And we've got 5, as it stands today, 5 permanent employed members of staff who work centrally. Estin tell us they like that balance. They like the balance of local authority officers and commissioned head teachers because it provides on the ground, up to date viewpoints of schools with leaders who are leading schools, but also a balanced and broad view from the local authority side. And I can see both. I can see why they would come to that summary. We've got a number of other officers that work for us in the team, sit in my team, if I'm allowed to call it that. We've got 2 performance specialists at the moment. They look after or help us to provide direction in terms of the strategy for literacy and for numeracy. We've got somebody who we don't call a performance specialist, but he considers a performance for digital skills. We've got an RVE, RSE lead person who that role is shared between Partneriaeth. We've got somebody who is a head teacher colleague, seconded, who looks after leadership and not necessarily for us as a local authority, but within the region and supports our secondary settings. And we've got the music service, somebody, Pam Cole, who looks after our MERGT, which is it used to be English as a digital language, but it's been consumed with other roles as well. And also our Welsh in education service, and there's a number of officers there too. So it's a large team. It's almost like a small primary school, how I see it. And I think one of the challenges for me since taking up post in September was that we didn't feel like we were a team. We were working in isolation together, and partly because of the pandemic. So one of the actions that I've taken is for us to work more closely together, and those officers have been attending the visits, which is the core work of the team. So I've been taking the colleagues with us. I forget to mention a colleague who looks after skills, and with the remit of 4 to 19, and that individual has been supporting us not only through our strategy for 4 to 19, but also bolstering the work of our secondary team. You can see that the core responsibilities of the team are obviously to support schools in their ability to self-evaluate and improve and plan for improvement. So this is not we don't see it as a top-down approach. We see it as a democratic approach. We work together with schools. So we need to build their capacity to, let's be honest, get better and know how to improve themselves. We do broker support, and we signpost effective practice and find ways in which we can share that. And there are examples of us sharing effective practice. Councillor Smith has already alluded to a few of those, but through our head teacher meetings, we've identified those schools who have had positive experience with Estin and shared those even during the pandemic, which I can tell you from even today's meetings, and I came from a head teacher meeting before I got here, they were well received. One of the roles, and I shared with CDC, is to develop leadership across the local authority. We do that in collaboration with the national programme through Partneria, their regional partners. And I've mentioned it is about building that school-to-school capacity. That's making reference to how schools work together in order to improve, and that's system-wide across the local authority. So reflecting on last year, this time last year, I was still undertaking virtual visits with my head teachers with schools. So visits weren't always happening in the setting due to the pandemic. Not only due to the pandemic because we weren't allowed to, but because there was such significant staffing absence, they couldn't afford the time and space in the room. So that was done, very remotely and in a hybrid way at times. 9 of our schools were inspected by Estin. We can't, as an authority, take credit for this. Our schools are brilliant places, but we have supported them. None of them were placed into category, and 5 of which were asked to write a case study to share their effective practice. I think that's a celebration, and we should remember that. So what's the core work of the school improvement team? So the core business and how we operate is school visits. So I'm a head teacher. I go and visit another head teacher and his senior leaders, and it's based around an agenda. We've co-constructed that agenda with school leaders. I consulted for the first 3 weeks of September with head teacher colleagues across the settings in Swansea to establish an agreed agenda. Initially for the autumn term, we've now expanded that into the spring term, and of course we'll do that for future in the summer term. And what that looks like is one visit, in summary, one visit per term per school. The outcome of that visit is a report based on the agenda that we set, and the focus is now firmly on the impact of school actions and on pupil progress. That sounds straightforward, and I'll explain why that's slightly complicated by Curriculum for Wales in the next presentation. The reports, in essence, are there to signpost support required, and the use of the word support, I keep saying this, sometimes makes me feel like we're helping a lot of people out. The reality of the word support is a co-constructive word. It's a hand-holding, it's a sharing of information, it's a what can I help you with, where can I signpost. It's not that we're uncovering lots of problems and we need to dig people out of a hole. So we also identify, as I've said, effective practice through those reports. So we're looking at strengths, we're looking at areas of development, and we're working in that democratic accountability, that hand-holding mission that we've got with our schools. The report does contain and share good, what the school is doing well, but it does need to signpost where the schools can to make improvements. And this year, we've made sure that we've got links directly with the governing body so that the governing body are immediately aware of any particular findings from that report. And it's fair to say that due to the pandemic, many of our governing bodies find it very difficult to articulate the work of their schools at the moment. That's because they've not been allowed into schools, and remote working hasn't afforded them the opportunity to really see, smell, and touch the work of schools. So that's something that we've introduced this year. Our objective as a team, I've mentioned these, but the lens that is provided by the school improvement guidance, non-statutory for this year and next year, but issued by Welsh Government. Helen and I were with Welsh Government this morning discussing that. It provides us with a new framework under which we should self-evaluate. So we're providing that to schools, and that's how we're asking schools to self-evaluate under the 3 areas. Obviously, we're supporting schools to successfully implement Curriculum for Wales. That's one of our objectives. One of our keen priorities is the implementation of the framework to embed whole school approaches to social emotional well-being. And obviously, as you've heard from Alison earlier on, ALNet. And lastly, linking in, it's the development of the workforce, and leadership, but at all levels. I'm not talking about developing our leaders as leaders. I'm talking about developing everybody from a child and parent and governor through to those senior leaders and head teachers. There are ongoing challenges in schools today. Some of them are facing significant challenges for staffing. And visits get cancelled because head teachers are required to cover in classes. And I'm going to tell you this, they're required to wipe tables in the dinner hall at lunchtime. And that provides them with a real challenge, and us too. But as you'll see from the report, the visits last year focused on well-being, ALNet, and the use of PDG for those more vulnerable learners. During the summer term last year, we had a heavier focus because we were able to get to schools on the provision for teaching and learning. And we began to help schools understand what learner progress was like. It was quite difficult and inconsistent, honestly, because some schools were still not able to facilitate those conversations. But what that looked like for our staff is that we were actually listening to learners, we were looking at books, and we were helping schools to evaluate their progress based on their school priorities. Many school priorities last year centred wholly around the support for learners and their emotional well-being. But we were able to help them maintain a consistency of approach towards Curriculum for Wales, and we're going to continue to do that. A number of groups facilitated by my team help us to maintain that sort of that view of support, really. What I'm trying to say is that our team facilitated a group called the COLP, Continuity with Learning Partnership. So that helped us to really embed the blended learning approach. And it continues to meet monthly, facilitated by my team, but also the development of a new group called SCAN, acronym heavy we are in education, aren't we? And so the Swansea Curriculum and Assessment Network pulls together the representation from all corners of our settings in Swansea. So I'm talking about primary, secondaries, ALN settings, our special settings, Welsh, our faith settings, etc. To start to develop a strategy for curriculum development in Swansea. That group is active, that group is effective, and it's beginning to provide us with opportunities to go and visit other settings and share effective practice more widely outside of the school visits that I've spoken to you about. The next part is about the work that our Welsh advisory team do. They found it very difficult to get into schools as individuals. There's only 5 employees who support our Welsh in education, and they were finding it very difficult to get out to schools for various reasons, as you'd imagine. So they provided live lessons. And I see the work of that team as teacher development officers. That's quite an old term, really. They're not. They don't provide lessons for children. They provide model good practice examples for teachers, and obviously you know, a key part of their work is the WESP and how we are developing, you know, a Welsh Government strategy to for the 2050 vision. That work is now really flat out, and I can tell you that Nerys Jones, who is our Welsh and Education Senior Officer, is working really hard to re-engage schools with something called Siarter Iaith at the Cymraeg campus, which is a well-agreed bronze, silver, gold programme that helps schools to develop good practice and strategies to develop Welsh across their settings. Obviously, some of the work that the team do is to develop professional learning for our practitioners, and one key piece of work is the development of you know, PL for Curriculum for Wales, professional learning for Curriculum for Wales, and we have been heavily focused on the work outlined by the Minister for Education and Welsh Language, who stated that we should be focusing on the development of a shared understanding of progression. So that's what the team did. And we're still in that phase in Wales, and we are in Swansea. So that's the focus of our work. And also the team is, we're required to undertake support of newly qualified teachers in Swansea. And there are a significant number in Swansea because we're a large city. So the work that the team carry that out as well. We also provide professional learning and support to the school governor unit. So I personally and some of the team train governors, and that's going to be a really key focus of the team going forwards, given the school improvement guidance and its heavy focus on democratic accountability, which lays quite clearly the responsibilities for the governing body and how they hold head teachers and school leaders to account. So I suppose in summary, there are some continued challenges that faced by schools and by the team, and I mean that visits get cancelled because of school problems, because of absence, and I would like to be able to sit here and tell you by the 31st of December that 95 settings will have been visited by one of my team and there'll be a lovely report sitting on the desk. I can't promise that's going to be the case, but we are working hard to make that happen. Estyn are really at it. They are inspecting schools, and their new inspection framework has a real heavy focus on the progress that learners make, and that is requiring our school leaders to pivot again post-pandemic and really focus sharply on their core work. So we're helping them to do that. Again, I've mentioned that the governing bodies who have been through the pandemic are finding it really difficult to get to know their schools like they used to. So that's a real key challenge for us. EFSM, free school meals and vulnerable learners, continues to be a focus for the team, and that's part of the visits and firmly will be in all of the visits, not just one. And a real challenge for us and a key piece of our work is Welsh Government School Improvement Guidance. It's a significant piece of work. It's a huge document which we have unpicked for schools and presented to them in a summarised format, but it does provide some contrast between the work seen by schools undertaken by Estyn. So we are working with Welsh Government, Helen hopefully will be able to bear me out on this, and hopefully Estyn, to find a clearer way through that. However, what I will say is I firmly believe that the direction we've taken through the lens of the school improvement guidance helps us as improvement advisors to focus sharply on what is important, what matters for schools in Swansea. So I'd like to think that visit agenda really helps us to focus on what's important for schools. I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much, David. Questions? Anybody at all? I've got one or two, actually, if I could, but if nobody else yet, great. The important people in all this are obviously the students, pupils, and so on. And Robert will know, because we've talked about this before, and we agree on it, that we see education as a journey, and therefore skills are so important. And we've got the city deal. So when you're actually in schools, we've got the city deal in Swansea, and it would be good for our students, our pupils to stay in Swansea. I'd like them to. They can go, but we'd like them to stay, but they need to have those proper jobs and so on. So what are you doing around getting the schools to inspire children to actually, get that job, to not just be in school, but what is the end result and so on. In other words, how are they going to get a job? How are they looking for employment? Are you encouraging schools, for example, to get companies in, to excite them, to inspire them to take a certain direction? But I think this is really important, and the aspiration of those children, and very often people who aren't performing so well in schools are the very ones we need to target with this. And I think it's so important. So when we talk about Estin and all the other things, the end result needs to be getting those children and pupils, students in work. And I'd like to think that we've got all those good jobs in Swansea, as I say, to keep them here.
Okay, thanks. I'm sure that Helen would like to say something and is probably better placed than I am to discuss the city deal. What I will say is I mentioned the work of an officer. So there is an officer who works and advises me on the practicalities around the city deal, more for the older learners. And I have to admit that my experience is in primary education. So if it's okay with Helen, I'll talk about that initially. So Curriculum for Wales provides us with a unique opportunity and a really good opportunity. And what we can tell you is a number of our schools, one of which I could tell you now, it allows us to reflect on effective practice when it comes to the authenticity. So our curriculums that get developed in Swansea schools, one of those areas of foci for the team is how is the school developing a curriculum that is contextually authentic? And what we mean by that is the learning, can children see the purpose of that learning? And some of our primary schools, even for really early children, young children, are developing those authentic experiences and attracting businesses, parents, the community into schools, so that even young children, even young learners can see that a commitment to education bears fruit. That's happening in a number of our settings. It's a real focus through the support visits on how schools are developing an authentic curriculum, taking into consideration the context in which that setting finds itself. And I know that Alison's mentioned it earlier on, there are some really clear links with further and higher education settings. And my team is providing some guidance and support around the training for those settings so that there's a more seamless transition from the end of statutory education when children leave at 16 into that further higher education and on to employment in school. So it's happening. It is a focus for us in the early progression for skills in primary schools, and it's beginning to happen later on through the city deal. Helen, I hope you can speak more freely about the city deal than I can.
I think Robert wants to come in. Oh, do you want Helen first? Helen.
Thank you. We've heard, I think, in this committee before, in this panel, that the new curriculum itself has employability skills writ large in the new curriculum offer. And indeed, careers and work-related education is something that's gained a lot of traction. So working in partnership, schools, both at a primary and a secondary level, can work with partners such as Careers Wales in a far more dynamic way than they have before. So the pathways and opportunities for future occupations and employment are far more exciting, open and accessible to learners from a younger age. Obviously, in Swansea, we focused very heavily on our digital skills as part of the city deal, and across those projects, you will see that digital skills have a part to play in all of those projects. So our focus in our Swansea Skills Partnership has been very much to focus on digital partners working with FE, working with HE to ensure that we build digital competency, not just in our learners, but in the staff who teach them as well. And not just general competencies around digital, but very specific and niche areas as well. So the partnership met this week and we discussed the coding aspects, the cyber security, all the kinds of jobs that we hadn't even heard about 10 years ago. They were discussed really as part of how we open the opportunities and doors for our younger learners and older learners in the education system in Swansea to see the possibilities from the local and regional projects in the city deal. So it's very exciting. And if I was a learner in Swansea these days, I'd have far more careers advice and opportunities to talk about future pathways, the types of jobs available than ever before. So I think it's quite exciting what's happening in terms of education. And I think the curriculum for Wales has allowed that to happen. So we're very lucky.
Good. Thank you, Helen. Robert.
Yeah, I think Helen has covered a lot of what I was going to say, Chair. I think the new curriculum, and we know we're coming to that, Curriculum for Wales does offer those opportunities to enhance careers education and enhance the skills agenda across primary and secondary schools. There are issues, there are specifics like meaningful engagement with the world of work, and the emphasis there is on the word meaningful. There are issues, you yourself have spoken about getting inspirational speakers in to speak to children, open their minds to the range of opportunities that are available to them, not only the academic pathways, but also the opportunities in terms of vocational education. And that's something which we want to expand locally. And I think allied to that kind of bottom-up approach, there's also a need to look at the reforms that Qualifications Wales, for instance, are already looking at, and they need to go further in that in terms of what are the qualifications we'll need for the future, what are the different pathways to obtain those qualifications, and that the skills agenda, the kind of skills we'll need with the city deal, that needs to feed in to those discussions with Qualifications. Well, what we don't want is something that's set in stone and doesn't change over time. Skills needs change over time. The skills of the workforce will change over time, and that's something that, as I said, both the curriculum and the qualification structure need to address.
Yes, thanks, Robert. Yeah, absolutely, really important points. One thing that the council did really well with the primary schools, where you had an entrepreneurship day at Castle Gardens, and I can remember going along and coming away, and I had a test tube full of sand, and it was beach in a bottle, and I thought, gosh, somebody sold me this, and I've come home and I've got a pile of sand. But really good about not just about thinking of the ideas, but selling them as well, and I did that. And I also had a flower pot full of earth, full of soil, and with some plants. I realized I had to plant them myself, but they really did a great job. So that is important, but it is important, I think, and we all agree that that needs to be at the top of that agenda, and how things change. Because when I went to school in Gorsainen, I can remember it was quite exciting when we had pencils, but it's moved on. And it really is important that we actually grasp that, and we are, but it is important, and inspire those children. A lot of the ones that Sandra mentioned at the last meeting are very people who need to inspire to get them into work and good jobs, and we hope keep them in Swansea too. So are there any other questions on that?
Just to say, I think firsthand, I've seen at a few schools, they are doing a lot of that entrepreneurial stuff, and all part of that new curriculum, which I think gives them the freedom and allows teachers certainly to do some more fun stuff as well with them, and they're learning at the same time. So that is definitely happening.
Right, you missed Angela then, but we won't ask her to repeat it now. But are there any other points? No. Great. Well, can I say thank you, and thank you, David, for the work that you're doing there. Really, really good. Maybe as I say, we move on to the next item, which is the new curriculum for Wales update. And again, it's the Robert, Helen and David show. I don't know who's coming on first.
I think we've started on Curriculum for Wales in a way already, but I'll ask David to go through the report, and then perhaps we could have questions at the end.
Okay, firstly, Chair, I get paid for the work that we do in the School Improvement Service, so no need to thank me. Secondly, the background to Curriculum for Wales, I assume that the panel have got. So in terms of an update, I think this was presented last in March, so I'm careful not to repeat what's been said before. There are not many changes to legislative changes, if any, to the direction in which Wales is going for Curriculum for Wales, but it's worthwhile providing a bit of an update. And what I'm going to do, and perhaps I should have shared this actually in hindsight, it's a wonderful thing, a summary of what I provide to governing bodies in terms of Curriculum for Wales. So I genuinely mean this, that we are having to work quite hard to train and raise awareness of Curriculum for Wales. It is a high-level curriculum. It does not describe or prescribe what schools should do in any given curriculum area. And the reason for that is because we know that when we give people something to do, they do it, and there's variation in the way that they do it, and that doesn't necessarily provide any creativity, and therefore it becomes quite flat quite quickly. So the Curriculum for Wales is underpinned by 4 purposes. I'm going to summarise this really quickly. Seen through the lens of areas of learning and experience, of which there are 6. There are mandatory elements to Curriculum for Wales, namely RVE, so religion, values and ethics, English and Welsh, and relationships and sexuality education. The latter is providing us with some challenge from parents across Wales, and there is an update on that, but I can't provide that now. So that's an ongoing challenge. There are wider requirements, of course, through the lens of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and ALNET, as we've heard. And I'm going on now, so you can hear how complex this is. So, you know, I'm not going to compare Curriculum for Wales to ALNET, but you can see where I'm going. There are integral skills that Curriculum for Wales describes that we need to understand how learners make progress in, and there are cross-cutting themes as well. And in all this, we've now got to make sense of how learners make progress through that non-descriptive, purpose-led curriculum. And it does provide practitioners with a certain level of anxiety. It gives us opportunities, okay, and that's what we should see it as. But we're so used to delivering a curriculum, we need to help learners, we need to help practitioners be what they wanted to be, which is autonomous and creative. So that's a challenge. Obviously, the overview is it creates a curriculum for children and young learners from 3 to 16. That's its scope. And currently, Year 7 learners who are in settings, those setting providers are not statutorily obligated to begin the work until next year. Children who are 3 to 11 years old, it's now statutory. The implementation for Year 11 learners will begin in September 2026. So we will have the full suite operational in Wales by 2026. It's evident to us that schools are in different places along the journey towards Curriculum for Wales realisation. We know that, and that's part of the work that we do as a service. And we do need to differentiate our support to settings and schools because their context provides different reasons for that. For example, capacity issues at senior leadership level, head teacher absence might provide us with challenges both through COVID and currently, and various other circumstances too. So the general journey that has been described to us as we know it now would be, 1, we need to design the curriculum, and I'm talking about individual settings. Secondly, we need to understand what progression is look like. And I mean, that's a shared progression of 3 to 16, because before we understand individual learner progression, we need to understand progression across 3 to 16. And then secondly, individual assessment, which then looks at the individual learners and groups of learners in a setting. So that's the journey. Where we're at in Swansea if you'd have asked me to talk to a head teacher in Swansea about their curriculum vision, things get thrown at you because we've said it for years now. But we are still in that the developing the shared understanding of progression phase. And we are heavily engaged with schools to work with their partners, their clusters, to look at linear progression, for want of a better phrase, from 3 to 16, because we've never really done that with any rigor in the past. We are doing it now. So Welsh Government do understand that it's an ongoing cycle and that curriculum design will look different as we make progress through that process, and that schools should be afforded the opportunity to change what that design process looks like. We're engaging, or have engaged, with learners, with parents, with our community to understand what each setting needs to include in its curriculum in order for it to be, as I suggested earlier on, authentic and provide the skills and experience and knowledge that learners in that setting need. Estyn have provided sort of a high-level overview in their most recent summary and annual report. That's detailed in the report. And the one thing I will say is that we are working really hard to understand what each setting is planning for through the lens of Curriculum for Wales. And that's a key part of our school visits. In terms of the school improvement guidance and Curriculum for Wales, the school improvement guidance is littered with reference to Curriculum for Wales. Thank goodness Welsh Government are joined up in their approach to Curriculum for Wales and school improvement guidance. But it does provide us with further challenges because, as I've said to you initially, that secondary settings for Year 7 don't have to implement Curriculum for Wales at this time. So therefore, we are having to work hard. And to be fair, the majority of settings in Swansea are engaging with secondary settings, are engaging with the Curriculum for Wales guidance, but they do know that they don't have to at this stage. And GCSEs and A-level results in Swansea are a real strength. So it's very difficult to come away from that. And of course, Qualifications Wales are undertaking a review of the way that that GCSEs are written. So we are on a journey, and we're certainly not there yet. As I outlined in the report, Jeremy Miles he held a conference for head teachers back in February, and as an outcome from that, he did produce a really useful, if you get the chance to look back at the report if you haven't, a really useful 3-page, I think it is, summary of the journey that schools should undertake for Curriculum for Wales realisation. And it describes that 3-step process. It's broken down a little bit further. So design your curriculum, progress and assessment. So it would be useful for colleagues and panel members to have a little look at that to see if you can make some more sense of it. So what do we do in Swansea to help our colleagues realise Curriculum for Wales and what underpins it? So there's a national network which we promote, facilitated by Welsh Government, and colleagues in Swansea have been facilitators on that. So it helps us so we've got some experts in the field. We've got a number of schools in Swansea that have been pioneer schools during the early inception of Curriculum for Wales, whose leaders help us to shape our wider leader networks and an understanding of Curriculum for Wales. And those 2 networks that I spoke to you about in the previous presentation about the Continuity of Learning Partnership and SCAN, Swansea's Curriculum and Assessment Network, in collaboration with Partneriaeth, our regional partners, help to shape the informal and formal offer for Curriculum for Wales professional learning in Swansea. I've already said that Curriculum for Wales professional learning is a focus for the school improvement team, and around 200 practitioners in Swansea engaged in work that we developed bespoke for Swansea in June of last year. And the focus of that was to develop a shared understanding of progression. And this week, practitioners have been working with colleagues in Pembrokeshire to develop progression maps. I'm going into detail here now, which provide a process by which schools can go to in order to develop a really robust shared understanding of progression from 3 to 16. It is a real challenge. Buildings that have children who are 3 to 11 exist here, and the others who exist with 11 to 16 exist there. It's very difficult to get colleagues around the table when they exist and work in different buildings. I'm not suggesting that we need to have them all under one roof, but we are working hard to bridge that gap. There's a little bit of reference to that later on in my discussion about transition. So I will say that we broker the support of Partneriaeth to undertake our professional learning or design professional learning for our workforce. And I meet with the strategic lead on a very regular basis. And it's fair to say their offer is now broad and appropriate. And I will tell you, they are listening to Swansea, because Swansea's needs are not the same as Carmarthenshire's and are not the same as Pembrokeshire's, are not the same as Neath Talbot's. I'm talking about local authorities that border ours. So we are shaping that, and Partneriaeth, to be fair, they listen closely to the needs of myself and the team and practitioners in Swansea. It is fair to say that when the region practitioners engage in the Partneriaeth's professional learning offer, Swansea nearly always has the most number of practitioners who sign up. That's the reality. We do have a higher population than both those local authorities. However, it outweighs the pro rata rate, sometimes double. So I can tell you that when we've engaged with another local authority very recently, as I've said this week, I had to turn down a number of Swansea practitioners to go on that training because we just couldn't. They just couldn't hold them. There wasn't enough space. So there's a real desire to take the shape for our practitioners to take the shape of the professional learning, and I'm really proud of that. I keep talking about Welsh Government school improvement guidance through the lens of our school improvement work, you know, today I can share with you that Helen and I were asked to engage with Welsh Government because Estyn signposted to Welsh Government that some of our work in this area is a strength, and they selected Swansea to have conversations with Welsh Government about that guidance. So Helen and I were both really pleased that that they did that. So in essence, Curriculum for Wales, and simply put, gets us to think about learning. And what is learning? What is learning is when children make progress in what? In skills, knowledge, and experience. And that's the crux of where we're at, really. We have worked hard to help practitioners understand what skills are important for the children in their setting. What is the knowledge those children need to have for that setting through the lens of the area of learning and experience? I'll take the example of expressive arts. And what opportunities and experiences are we going to provide those learners that gives them the authenticity by which will help them to participate as employees in our local authority in the future? We are working quite hard with our schools to support them in the development of an on-entry system. So any school mover within Swansea, so if a child was to move from one school to the other between the age of 3 to 16, it's now a requirement from Welsh Government that that recipient school has an understanding of that child's abilities and attributes in literacy, numeracy, physical development, and social and emotional health and well-being. That's new. And we're working hard to make sure that schools have an understanding of that. We have established a number of structures. I've mentioned those networks to support Curriculum for Wales development, and those transition plans that I made reference to earlier on, in the light of that 3 to 16 continuum, makes it specific, makes it really explicit rather to school leaders that they have to engage in more than just a punitive approach to transition. There needs to be a real joined up sense between primary and secondary schools, and that hasn't always been a strength of those two partnerships, those two settings, both in Swansea and across Wales. And I think we've got a real opportunity here to do that. One of those opportunities that I can tell you, as outlined by Estin, I'm sorry if I'm going on here, but our school improvement team is made up of commissioned head teachers. The benefit of that is one of those commissioned head teachers is a head teacher in a secondary school who happens to be the chair of one of the secondary head teacher groups called SCASH. Coincidentally, our primary colleague is a primary school improvement advisor who happens to be the chair of UCA. So all of a sudden, we're making links within these groups, and we can share messages quite quickly. So we can mobilise effectively, quickly in Swansea, and we can continue hopefully with that method of school improvement. Curriculum for Wales have mentioned about SAC, so RVE, RSE. So Swansea has developed and published, shared with its schools, its agreed syllabus for RVE, and also the RSE policy, and makes reference to Welsh Government guidance. And a member of staff in my team has developed a suite of professional learning for governors, for practitioners, to support their work for RVE and RSE. And I would say we couldn't celebrate the work of Jennifer anymore, because it's a real strength of Swansea and the direction in which we're going. I've spoken to you previously about the work of our Welsh in Education service. That's a real strength of Swansea schools. And I think, just to re-emphasise the work of the School Improvement Service, Curriculum for Wales will continue to be on the agenda at every opportunity when we get to visit our schools. It is a challenge. I will say again that not all schools are in the same place, and I know Welsh Government are concerned about that, but they have to afford us the opportunity for schools to catch up. We as a service are aware and have undertaken a brief discussion, really, not a discussion, but more than a brief discussion about which schools need the greater support. So our visits are not, so they are differentiated, and where schools require additional support to bolster their work to develop Curriculum for Wales, we're in a position to provide that. So I shall be quiet and answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much for that, really detailed response, and it is a really important issue. Any questions? Councillor.
Hi, just about the training programs with Partneriaeth. How much money do you have to spend on that per teacher, and do they actually truthfully find that the training programs are beneficial?
Two key questions. So any work that the training itself that practitioners get access to for Partneriaeth is cost-free at source, but they may have to pay supply. So that there's not a cost commitment to the school. We do broker that support, and I know Helen can provide some more background to that. So we do broker that support. So it is there is a cost somewhere for Partneriaeth. We have to understand that because their officers are paid. The quality of that provision, that professional learning, is something that's on my radar. I'll be honest with you, and I hold the strategic lead to account for that. And the conduit for that quality assurance is through the head teacher network meetings that we have. They tell us what their practitioners think and the impact that has on the provision and the impact of progress and learning in their schools. It's it genuinely is a focus for me and the service. The quality of provision and professional learning that Partneriaeth provide. Not only our local authority, but I meet with senior school improvement advisors from both the other local authorities that sit within Partneriaeth, and collectively we hold officers in Partneriaeth to account for the quality of that provision. So currently, I'll say this, that we were how can I be diplomatic, Helen? We were looking to make sure the service was improving, but I can say recently what I've seen, that offer is good and it's broad.
Thank you. I can see Helen's got her hand up. Helen.
Yes, just to come back on the cost. I mean, notionally, our council contribution to the regional partnership is about 123,000 per annum. So if you break that down into our practitioners, both leaders, teachers, TAs, who could benefit, that comes to about £30 per head per annum. Now, if you compare that to one training course, very often they're about £299 plus VAT if you're paying a commercial company to attend a day's conference somewhere. So in terms of value for money, potentially the way we work regionally by pooling resources is quite a cost-effective way, but it all depends on the quality you get, not just the cost of it. But that said, I think it's a fair amount of money to be paying per annum. And it's in our interest as a local authority, really, to get behind that and to be in it to win it, so to speak. So it was really pleasing to hear that the participation rate from Swansea was quite high from David. So I'm really pleased that that is the case. And also the positive feedback we've had on some recent curriculum professional learning is obviously very encouraging for a relatively new partnership.
Thank you, Helen. Any other questions? No. Thank you, David. I mentioned in the past about the fact that obviously the new curriculum is not prescriptive as before. And therefore, we need to take, teachers who've been used to doing that with us. You've recognised that. There are a lot of teachers out there who are so excited about the new curriculum, and when you meet them all the time, and they really are. So that is good news. But thank you very much, and thank you for that. And we'll no doubt speak again about the curriculum. The next item on the agenda is the feedback from Partneriaeth Scrutiny Group. I think I've sent gosh. Michelle has sent all the your notes out there. I don't know if anybody has got any queries you'd like to raise. If not, we'll move swiftly on. I have to say the meetings don't go on quite as long as this normally. We've got a marathon, but the reason is there was a meeting cancelled in September. And as a result, we've had to sort of squeeze things into this meeting. So I do apologise for that. And the final item on the agenda is the work programme. So if anybody got any queries about that. The one point that was on there was about this when we were going to speak to secondary schools and its cluster, and big thanks to Helen actually for suggesting Pontedillas and the cluster, and to Michelle for getting in touch with the head teachers in the primary schools and the head of the comp. If there are any questions on the programme. If not, I thank you all very much and look forward to seeing you, if not before, on the 15th of December. Great, thank you very much. No, it's been 3.